Hello and welcome to another episode of the Truth Reveal podcast, where we host conversations that relate in order to reconcile as we uncover God's truth. I'm your host, Holly Harris, and I am joined by my co-host,
April River.
Peak.
Well, I should have pointed to, Latricia Peak and Rivers. Okay, our topic for today is called A Nation of Pill Poppers Coping with Pain. I'm very, very excited to have this conversation because I feel like it's a relevant one due to the climate that we're currently in. And I just wanted to give you guys just a few statistics before we get started. According to the Mayo Clinic Proceeding.org website, there was a study done in the Annals of Internal Medicine, and it found that nearly 1/3 of U.S. adults currently use prescription opioids. Also, the United States leads the world in opioid use, consuming roughly 80% of all the world's opioids.
Whoa.
Isn't that something?
Wow.
Yeah. According to former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, the substance use disorder problem, which includes opioids, is now more prevalent than common medical diseases such as diabetes, and is 1.5 times more prevalent than all cancer diagnoses combined.
What?
Yeah. More people use prescription opioids than use tobacco. With increased opioid misuse, drug overdoses have become the leading cause of death for Americans younger than 50 years and a growing problem for those aged 15 to 24. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimates that 130 plus people die every day from opioid-related drug overdoses, and 10.3 million people misuse prescription opioids in 2018.
Wow.
So you see how important it is for us to have this conversation. And I was also watching the news, I believe it was on Wednesday on Fox 46, and they mentioned the opioid epidemic and said because of the coronavirus, the opioid overdoses have increased by 24%.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a real problem and definitely something worth talking about, especially with today's climate. So what we wanted to do was to dig further into this conversation. And in order to do that, we wanted to discuss the Netflix documentary, The Pharmacist. Okay, this documentary follows Dan Snyder, a grieving father credited as being one of the first individuals to bring attention to the opioid crisis. So this is a spoiler alert. If you have not seen the documentary, you might want to get up on out of here, go watch it, and then come back and listen to the conversation. So, yeah. So what we're going to do is just start by summarizing the whole documentary and just kind of give our thoughts on it, kind of, through each episode. So we're going to start with episode 1 and 2, and Sweet is going to start us off by giving us a summary of that episode.
So essentially, episodes 1 and 2, you are being introduced to the Snyder family. Typical American family, husband, wife. I think Dan and his wife met in high school, got married. He went to pharmacy school. They had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They traveled the country, going to amusement parks. They were big people that videotaped their whole life, their Christmas celebrations, their travels, their exploits. They were very family-centered, very community-centered, and they lived in St. Bernard Parish, which is in Louisiana. Right next to the 9th Ward of Louisiana, which is probably more of an urban area of the state. I believe the Ninth Ward was one of the areas that was heavily impacted during Hurricane Katrina, predominantly African-American portion of, or African-American community. So basically you're getting this backdrop story about this family, and they're painting this picture of, they're like good people, good, wholesome people. Kids grew up in this very supportive environment, family, you know, their mom and their dad, have everything that they could need, have everything that they could want, not lacking. They're definitely loved. They're definitely supported. And so what happens is Danny Jr. Doesn't go away to college, has a girlfriend. I think he's maybe doing some community college work, has a girlfriend who's in school. He goes and visits her on the weekends or whatever. The episode takes you back, or the first episode takes you through the whole process of the parents finding out that their son had been killed. He left the house one night, going out, told him that he would be back. They didn't think anything of it, went to bed, no thoughts about it. 2:00 in the morning, they get a bang on the door. It's the police needing them to come and basically identify his body. So you can imagine this family was completely and utterly distraught. They'd never experienced any type of trauma like this. So I found it very interesting just how grief can be so overpowering, because at one point in the segment, Mr. Snyder, the father, stated that they actually consider as a family committed suicide.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't fathom life outside of having a piece of their family not be present.
Yeah.
So they go, takes you through the first episode of them going, they identify the body. It is Danny. And I thought this was kind of weird, but I guess it all makes sense now, because Mr. Snyder used to record everything. So a lot of the documentary is not reenactment as it pertains to the recordings. These are actually recordings of conversations that he's had with his family, conversations that he had with his wife, conversations that he had with the police. So basically, after they go through that initial grieving period, like any family who has a family member that's been murdered, I have a stepbrother that was murdered. The next thing after grief is you want to find answers. You want to know who did this, so justice can be served. So Mr. Snyder basically started this one-man crusade for trying to find out who basically murdered his son. So he's going into this lower Ninth Ward, putting up posters, knocking on doors.
Gangster, wasn't he?
Gangster, straight gangster. He was so gangster that the black pastor was like, let us help Johnny out before they kill him.
I'm telling you.
So the church actually started partnering with him and going out into the community. They had family and friends. They started a reward fund, and they were working through Crime Stoppers, and the reward got up to $10,000. They were able to generate $10,000 as a reward fund for anyone who had any information about young Danny's murder, because this is a culture where you do not snitch. And it's also a culture where everyone was fully aware of what was going on. This is a very drug-infested community. People are afraid. Death is very apparent and very real, and no one wants any heat or any attention coming to their family. So no one was going to snitch. We transitioned to basically, I guess the first episode actually takes you through Danny's death up unto his conviction of his killer. So there's some plot twist in there that you can watch and still find out. And it takes about a year and a half, I think it's 19 months past him being killed before they're ever actually able to get a conviction.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of that had to do just with the fervency and the tenacity of this dad that's like, we want justice for our son. So even though I'm kind of giving you a synopsis, there's still pieces that I'm completely leaving out. So you can still watch it. Anybody have any comments about that first episode you guys want to chime in on?
Well, I thought that it's really interesting, and I think that, I mean, that's it's the attitude of a lot of us. Like when it doesn't kind of hit home, like Danny's father, like he was saying he would see overdoses, happening in the lower ninth ward all the time, but he was one of the people who would be like, well, they got what they deserved, or you know what I'm saying? So it really kind of brought out that, putting a face to a name, so to speak, like as far as it happening to his own family. And, because we know that the crack epidemic hit the Black community really hard. And a lot of the attitudes towards it was kind of like, well, and it continued to go on and to go on, and then, as you kind of see things transition and it's starting to hit other communities, then, lights are, shined on certain problems. So I found that really interesting, like our attitudes towards, drug users based on race. Like, on one hand, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, sweetie.
Oh, no, go ahead. I just wanted to say something,
Oh,
piggyback off of that.
yeah, but I mean, that's basically it, was just how our attitudes can be different based off of race as it relates to, drug users. One over here, we may look and say, okay, this person needs help, but if it's in a lower socioeconomic, community, or person that has a lower background or whatever, according to society, then we kind of look at it as, oh, they kind of got what they deserved, or we might not have the same compassion if the person doesn't look like us, is basically what I'm trying to say. Right. And I think that may go both ways.
Absolutely.
Not just,
absolutely. And I think one of the other things, like, to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying regarding race, and the Snyder family, they were so outside of the shock of losing a child, they were in another level or in another state of like culture shock because their son was on crack. And they had no idea. And the father's a pharmacist, and there's recording where the mom is saying, why didn't he think that he could tell us, that he could have that conversation with us? So to that whole racial point, they couldn't even conceive in their construct that their child would even use crack. And then just, how we view it, it was a crack epidemic, but it's an opioid crisis. Even the terminology of how we talk about it is different. And that does have a lot to do with race.
Well, I wanted to bring out one thing from the first episode. I hope I don't kind of ease over into the second. Stop me, sweet, if I do, because if I'm trying to remember where the first episode ended. But the humanity of it, when you talk about race or whatever, I feel like this documentary did an excellent job of putting the humanity for the drug addict, and the drug dealer. Like the street drug dealer. I don't know if he was revealed in the first episode or second, but putting humanity behind that, knowing both sides of the gun, if so to speak.
It is.
Even with the young lady who ends up helping Mr. Snyder solve the son's murder. The young lady that did call crime. Well, no, it wasn't. She did call Crime Stoppers, but they didn't report it to Mr. Snyder. But he ended up. Oh, Mr. Snyder with his tenacious self.
I'm telling you.
Called her on the phone book, and she was the lady that he needed to be talking to. And she was like, I called Crime Stoppers. I saw everything. And putting the humanity on the young man who even the young man who sold the dope to his son and killed his son. And knowing his side of the story. So I think the documentary did a really good job
Yeah.
and putting humanity, so that when we do think about drug users, drug dealers, we understand that these are people, traumatized people. And I think this is part of the whole conversation we're going to have about people's inability to deal with pain.
Yeah.
Right. And I agree with that 100%. And just to kind of segue into that episode, that's a good segue, April. I think it also showed the divinity of God, because some of the things that took place, it was completely orchestrated. For example, the fact that this man is literally going down. First of all, this is back in later. I should have told you guys that this documentary is kind of recorded in late 90s. So we're 99, I think 99-ish, going into the 2000s when we actually use phone books. How about that? So this man is literally going down through the phone. He literally got a map of the lower Ninth Ward, did a circumference, and started calling people within that circumference. And the sovereignty that I'm speaking of is the fact that the last person he called in his list was the person who he needed to speak with, who held all the answers. That's God. That was God. And so I think it just shows like a parent's love as well when you talk about humanity, how there was just, I have to get answers, and even his family began to think he was a little bit obsessed with it, but it produced results. So episode 2 starts with, we now have young Danny's murderer having been captured and convicted, and now the Snyder family is having to come back to normal, come back to some form of normalcy, because throughout this process, Dad has not been working. His full-time job has been, I'm going to help find my child's murderer. So the show starts back, or episode 2 opens up with Mr. Snyder is going back to work. As stated, he's a pharmacist, and in the local parish. So I kind of got the impression that a lot of people knew him. Maybe in this St. Bernard parish, it was maybe 1 or 2 pharmacies, and everybody knew Dan Snyder. And his personality, you'll see that on the documentary, is one that's very personable. So I could see him being like around the way Uncle Dan, Mr. Dan type of guy. So he's working, and he starts out small, and he's kind of just working part-time or whatever. And he begins to notice that there are a lot of young people, specifically in between the ages of 18 and 25, that appear pretty healthy, are coming into the pharmacy for pretty high-powered Oxycontin prescriptions. And so initially, that's kind of like a red flag is stirred within him, like, I wonder, like, why these pretty young, healthy-looking kids around the age of his son. So we have that as the connector, coming in with these high-powered prescriptions. So he starts to kind of pay more attention to the prescriptions and who's coming to get those prescriptions filled. So when I was taking notes about this episode, it said that one of the statistics that was quoted, or one of the statements that was made, was that in 1997, Oxycontin marketing in pharmacy, marketing in pharmacy. 1997, Oxycontin is marketed in the pharmacy magazine. This is what he said. So he knew about this drug. They started marketing this drug in 97 in the pharmacy magazines. And they were marketing it as the miracle drug for chronic pain, because one Oxycontin, if I remember right, is equivalent to 16 Percocet. So if you don't know anything about, drugs or pain pills, Percocet is something pretty heavy. This is a pretty intense drug. So when you say Oxycontin is 16 of one, Percocet is 16 of one Oxycontin. This is a high-powered drug. This is gonna get you all the way right. It's taking your pain. Right. It's taking your pain away. That's why they're calling it the miracle drug. So one of the things that makes Oxycontin such a attractive drug is it has a 12-hour time release, which basically means you take this drug and it lasts for 12 hours. So it's slowly releasing into your system over a 12-hour period. So not only are you being pain-free for 12 hours, well, that is it. You get a 12-hour stint of not having to deal with pain. But what drug users were doing was they were taking the pill. If it had codeine, they were taking the codeine off, and so they were shooting it up. They were crushing it and chewing it. If they chewed it, it gave them a quick rush, like bam, you got everything you needed. Your 12 hours was probably in that initial consumption. So when you think about that, something that was originally designed to be over a 12-hour period, and, you know, it doesn't go into the details of how long, but if you're chewing it and you get an immediate rush, that's 12 hours in 1 hour. So if you're legit having pain, you're going to be in pain for the next 11 hours because you've gotten all of the initial rush from the medication. And they had individuals who had taken the drug and who were actually addicted. And that's what they said. They said it was a quick rush. It was better than heroin. For those who had been users, it was better than heroin. It gave them energy. And then it was like a calm down, like you were like in a very good place. So Dr. Snyder, but Mr. Snyder started to notice that you're getting all these teenagers or young adults coming in that look and appear pretty healthy, and they're getting this drug. So he starts to pay attention to who's writing these prescriptions. And so in his starting to pay attention to who's writing the prescriptions, he starts to also see that they're getting certain prescriptions written. So they're getting Oxycontin, they're getting a drug called SAMHSA, and they're getting Xanax. And they refer to this as the Holy Trinity. Talking about Jesus. Don't be putting Jesus up in there. Don't turn Jesus into a drug. Sorry.
Oh, gosh.
So they're referring to this as the Holy Trinity. Like, this going, I mean, that's, for some that may not be self-explanatory, but it's basically like, this is everything. This drug is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. These three together. So on the street, this Oxycontin can sell for like $30 for one pill, $50 for one pill, or even $80 per pill. So if you have somebody who's getting a consistent supply of Oxycontin and they're not actually using it and they're selling it, if you're getting a 30-day supply, and you're paying, $80 for one pill for 30 days, somebody do the math. That's a lot of money. And so that's what they started to realize. They started to look into the doctor who was actually prescribing this medication. They being Mr. Snyder started to look into this doctor, and he started to see that she was prescribing this medication. She was prescribing the Oxycontin. People were showing up at her clinic over in the middle of the night. What doctor's office do you know that's open in the middle of the night that's not an urgent care? They would have lines around the building. She did not take insurance. You had to pay in cash. I think they called it a stat fee, which was about $250. And then right. And then another $150, I guess, for the prescription. I'm not quite sure. But when you watch the documentary, it could give you more details. What stood out was in 2001, this lady made $2 million, deposited $2 million in cash, which was what alerted the officials, because you're just not depositing $2 million in cash without getting the attention of somebody in higher places. So what they also started to show at the end of episode 2, and then, April can speak on 3 and 4, is that in that St. Bernard Parish, because there was such an influx of the opioid use and abuse, they begin to see more overdoses. Because what the drug does is it actually slows down your heart and it slows down your breathing. So even if you're taking the drug as prescribed, if you're taking it over an extended period of time, you could take the drug as prescribed, go to sleep, and still die in your sleep because your heart is stopping, you just stop breathing. And so they were starting to see a lot of that taking place. And a turning point for Mr. Snyder was a young lady came in to the pharmacy to get an Oxycontin prescription filled. And I think she was maybe in her early to mid 20s. And I think she had been taking it for like a year. I'm not quite sure, but he didn't feel comfortable prescribing it to her. He didn't want to, but he didn't own the pharmacy. And so the owner told him to go ahead, and the owner kind of didn't want to ruffle any feathers because that's money. People are coming here to get their prescriptions filled. The owner encouraged him to move forward with the prescription. And I think maybe within a day or two, that young lady died from an overdose. And so that was that turning point where Mr. Snyder became that tenacious person again to really start digging deep. And that's the end of episode 2.
Yeah, it was really interesting. But just going back to, I mean, even before, the whole when he noticed the prescriptions, and just going back to his case, his with his son dying, like when I remember him calling the police and how rudely they talked to him, just like the attitudes of the police were even just kind of going back to the attitudes that we have when it comes to drug users. We don't really see them as human beings or really see their story and how they got to that point. But he was treating him like he was just like, whatever, he died, he probably just tried to take the drugs off of him, and this, that, and the third. And another thing that I noticed that was interesting was the guy that killed him, like April was saying, as far as showing the personal part and showing both sides of the gun. And what I thought was interesting was that he said that the first time that he ever got out of his neighborhood was when he was traveling on a prison bus. And I just thought that was so like sad that was, and I think a lot of times, like just going back to, issues like within our community, just something as simple as just seeing a new environment, seeing something new and different can really kind of shape your perspective in a different way. But it was sad that the first time that he saw, anything new was when he was on a prison bus traveling to prison. So, and then just the whole culture, the whole silence culture, the don't snitch culture, and how it kind of perpetuates the same cycles over and over, the same cycles of violence, the same cycles of drug use. Is that don't snitch, culture. And and even the young lady that helped Mr. Snyder, and how she feared for her life, and these were people that she knew that were threatening her life, and you know what I'm saying? And, and she was going back and forth on whether or not she would help. And then finally, she was able to help. So I know I kind of, went back.
No, that's good.
But I just kind of wanted to touch on those few little aspects because yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say too, Holly and April, I also forgot to bring out, and April may go into more details about this, that Oxycontin was produced by Purdue Pharma.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring it out.
Yeah. She's going to bring it out. You heard.
I'm going to talk about them jokers.
Yeah, that was when I was watching it. I was like, Purdue chicken? So it was like the fastest growing pill in America during this time, just to throw that, throw some more things out there. So it was a very, as I was even watching it, I was just like, wow.
Yeah.
This is a lot.
Oh, go ahead, April.
I just want to bring out this one point. I know after we do all the summarizing, we'll go into like the layers and all these other things. But back to the young man, I want to go back to the young man who was the murderer, and the dope dealer. I think the young man at the time he did this, he might have been 15, 16,
He was
maybe.
very young.
Yeah, he
And he
was.
talked about his first experience with drugs. His
Mm,
mother was a
His
drug addict.
mother.
yeah, yeah.
His mother was on I don't know if she was on crack or heroin. I don't know what she was on. But he said that, he grew up really rough um and he was like, you know what, I'm tired of this, because I think there
Mm,
might have been 10 of them. He might have been the
11.
old 11,
It was
11
11.
children. Okay. And he said, I'm tired of this, how my mama's doing with all this drugs. So he went and threw her drugs away. And so he called,
yeah.
and so he thought he was doing something righteous.
Mm-hmm.
And then she said, I'm gonna teach him a lesson. He had
Yes.
someone hold him down,
Mm,
turn on the stove, and put his hand on the stove
mm,
and burn it. And so he said after that, he didn't care anymore. He was
yeah.
broke. It broke him.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to
Yeah.
bring that out.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point too. Like especially for me being in the line of work that I'm in, it also shows how the drug use produces, how it not only affects the user, but how children are impacted. So
Yeah.
he's trying to be responsible in this environment, and in his attempt to be responsible, he in turn is being abused.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah. And so he just became a product of his environment. It's
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was something, them first two episodes. Okay, so what I wanted to bring out some other things as it relates to episode two, because it was very interesting just to see the whole dynamic when it came to the doctor in her doctor's office. Like you said, like it was in a sketchy neighborhood. It
Yeah,
wasn't
it's
a
in the
business
hood.
district. She was out in the middle of a highway, and then she had irregular office hours, was coming
Very.
in at 4 day in the morning, and people were outside from different states, like traveling to her
Mm-hmm.
office in order to get this medication. And another thing, the police were helping. I said,
Come
what
on.
in the cotton picking?
Crookedness.
I'm telling
Corrupt
you,
New Orleans Police Department.
honey,
Shout out to them.
corrupt. Okay. They might not be corrupt no more. Wait a minute. I don't
They
know,
was
but you just,
trifling though.
Look,
They was
honey,
look.
trifling.
trifling.
From the '99 to about 2005.
Right.
You see? Oh, yeah. And but what got, I don't know if it was on the second episode or if it was further. Let me see. She was seeing 76 patients a day.
That was on the second episode.
Yeah, and he had a friend that was there waiting for 2 days. I said, for
2 days
2 days.
waiting on his
They
medicine.
were waiting on the prescription drugs.
And they were saying that when they her business, and thank you for kind of triggering my memory, her business began to grow and expand in such a manner that she moved from one location
Yeah.
to an even bigger location that had multiple floors. And basically
Mm-hmm.
in those multiple floors, there were people waiting, like Holly said, for days. But
Yeah.
while they were waiting, they were basically going through withdrawals,
Yeah.
going through cold sweats,
Mm.
going through chills, because
Yes.
they're in need of the medicine. So
Yeah.
people who had gotten their medicine first,
Mm.
and there were others
Yeah.
waiting, they would
Yeah.
sell them
Honey
their
came back
medicine,
and sold it.
just come back in and sell it just to get them through so they could get theirs.
Uh,
I repeat, I
honey.
came and got my medicine.
Uh,
Holly and April still waiting on their medicine. I came back and sold them some pills just to get them through to the point where they can get theirs.
honey.
Crucial.
Yeah. And
Crucial.
then the other part was she was a pediatrician, mind you. It
Whoa.
went into
That's so
pain
scary.
Pain
management.
management. She sure did.
How
She
you gonna go
went.
from children to adults?
These kids ain't making no money. Kids ain't making no money.
And it
That was
just really
scary.
showed me that she was an opportunist. She saw an opportunity because
She
she
took it.
came in on the cusp of seeing, Purdue Pharma, and all of these other organizations pushing pain management, and we need to start
Mhm.
prescribing opioids again. And she was like, the light bulb went off. Oh, I can
Mhm.
make some money. just like a regular street level drug dealer, when, it's the same way she kind of went about it. So that was interesting to me. I was just like, people was camping out. Okay.
And the fact that they referred to Oxycontin. And I think this kind of goes back to when we were talking about jargon and word choice, how they referred to it as the angel of mercy. I don't know if you guys caught that, but that was one of the things that I wrote down. They referred to the drug as an angel of mercy because it's helping these people who are so pain ridden, who really weren't pain ridden. They were addicted. But when you're marketing something, you can't come out and market it for, you take it one time, you're gonna be hooked. That's not really attractive. So I thought that was interesting too.
It's crazy how they did that. April, did you have anything else for the second episode before you go into 3 and 4?
No, good old Dr. Clickett. I mean, I said no, and I tell you,
honey,
it again, just one doctor. Yeah. And I mean, I know it took it's more levels to this. Like I said, we're going to get into that part. But the pharmacy industry, pharmaceutical sales, not the pharmacist, but pharmaceutical sales industry, along with one doctor that was willing to just do down and dirty for money's sake, created a whole community, states, because these people, like you said, people come from other states, of not only drug users, but drug dealers.
Yeah.
They, you know what I'm saying? They're selling their pills. You know what I'm saying, to other people.
Yeah.
And then having enough to get high themselves and go back, re-up. She really was like a supplier, if you want to look at street terms. You know what I'm saying? She was a supplier, and we later on come where they insinuate that she also was a user, and I believe it because that was dumb. You know what I'm saying? You got people, you knew.
Honey.
I used to work in the bank. We would flag accounts when you were depositing too much
anything
cash.
over 10,000.
You know what I'm saying? We flagging it like, wait a minute, you don't own a check cash in place for a strip club. We like, why are you got all this cash in hand?
Yeah.
So she wasn't that. She was brilliant and dumb at the same time.
See, if she was a street level drug dealer, she would have known that. They be knowing not to put too much money.
No, that was that dope though. I believe she was using also.
Yeah,
she was taking the opioid. So anyway.
Yeah.
Valid judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we're going to continue on with our conversation, and we're going to do a synopsis of episode 3 and 4. April?
All right. Episode 3 begins where the contention between Mr. Snyder and his job. Because another level to this, so you have the Dr. Cleggett, you have the all the overdoses and the increase of overdoses, and you're seeing the traffic. But another dynamic was the actual pharmacy stores in the middle of this, and it kind of highlighted the contention between Mr. Snyder and the owner of the pharmacy, and how they were being trained that the doctor knows best.
Yeah.
If you see something, if you see the prescription for the what they call quote unquote Holy Trinity, the Xanax, the Somas, and the Oxycontin, to basically turn a blind eye and don't look at how often they've been coming in. How often? Because Mr. Snyder was a very sharp man. He'd be looking like, look, you done been in here already. Like, he'll ask them, now, what was wrong with you now? What you go to the doctor for? He was like, well, you don't need all this. You about to kill yourself, He said, if a 500 milligram ibuprofen don't help you, I don't know what will. He just like Mr. Snyder was really, really on it.
Yeah.
And so the contention and the role of the pharmacist for him, basically, Mr. Snyder became God used Mr. Snyder
He
because he
did.
became what the future of pharmacies look like today because of this crisis, because they didn't have the mechanisms they have now, and didn't have it where we will turn. Now you'll see signs that they'll tell you, we will turn you away. They will flag you. We'll call the police. We'll do whatever. If you're coming in here, and they have software now where they can tell, you know what I'm saying, where the person went to another store down the street and got it filled and then came here, and then
Yeah.
and Mr. Snyder had to do with that, about why that even happened. But anyway, let me go ahead and summarize the episode. So it starts out with the role of the pharmacy in all this and the contention that he was having with his boss. And the reason why he needed to lay low, Mr. Snyder kind of didn't want to ruffle too much feathers because he wanted to get back in the pharmacy, because he wanted to have a way to get Dr. Cleggett, to kind of pretty much bring her down.
Mm-hmm.
And and Mr. Snyder, and what this third episode also did was they began to interview doctors and talk about how the industry was being changed. I didn't write the name of the young woman down, but it was a doctor specifically was talking about how they began to train the doctors and how the pharmaceutical reps begin to come into the hospitals to sell the doctors on this. And they begin to get new training and new materials, because it's not that the doctors weren't familiar with oxycodone. They usually stayed away from it unless you was like seriously,
Yeah.
injured and had chronic pains, because they knew of its addictive
properties, yeah.
properties.
Addictive properties, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, but what happened is basically became a re-indoctrination, if you will, where the pharmaceutical reps will come and say, "Look, we got approved by the FDA. That there's nothing in here. This is not habit forming." And they begin one note I wrote down, and y'all mentioned it about the Angels of Mercy, but they begin to talk about how they train doctors to now, you are not a compassionate doctor if you didn't
Yeah.
prescribe these opioids, if you didn't just subscribe this harsh addictive medicine that was being pushed. It caused them to push past their own judgment,
Yeah. Yeah.
and kind of retrain them and say, you're not a compassionate doctor if you don't give this. But all it was, in my eyes, all it was a sales pitch and a sales scheme. So it goes to that, and then y'all, it gets really CSI episodes 3 and 4, because I'm talking about the FDA, the DEA, the FBI, and Mr. Snyder's in the midst of all of it.
Bring that out, April. I forgot to mention that in episode 2, Mr. Snyder had reached out to the DEA.
Yes.
So I forgot that, but can you highlight a little bit of that so they'll know?
Sure. Mr. Snyder reaches out to the DEA because Mr. Snyder is gangster. And Mr. Snyder, he pulled his poor little wife out in the middle of the night talking about, look at this, get my camera, come here, baby. You record, and we gonna ride by.
Ride or die.
He is riding by with his wife, recording, looking, seeing all the cars in there. He even went as far as to start going, taking license plates and whatnot, and just recording and showing that there was a New Orleans police officer in there guarding the door, all of this. And so he reaches out to the DA. He's like, look, there's something wrong going on here, and y'all need to look at this. And at first he got a little bit of kind of run around between DA and the FBI. And I think the FBI said, look, we're already on it. Either the DA or the FBI was like, look, we're already investigating her, Mr. Snyder. We can't tell you the ins and outs, but we're on it. But they was taking too long for Mr. Snyder. I really think, and to be honest, when you watch the documentary, it was sad, because it took so long, the bureaucracy of it
Oh
all,
my God.
getting between the FDA and the red tape and the political whatever of the DEA and the FBI, to where they waited long enough to create another generation of addicts.
Mm,
Enough time for one set to be hooked, the mamas and the daddies, and then for their children to grow up with addict parents.
mm,
Like it took a long process
yeah.
of years. So anyway, okay, so it gets all CSI. You got the FDA, the DEA. Mr. Snyder's in the midst of it all, and he's doing his thing. And then they bring out in the final episode, I think the end of the third and on into the final episode. This is where they really begin to talk about Purdue Pharma, and they had one former pharmaceutical rep who basically was kind of like the I guess not a whistleblower, but he kind of told from his perspective because he was there in the midst of it, and he ended up leaving because he was like, I ain't here for this, and I don't want to go to jail, and
Yeah.
and he felt like they really were pushing this drug, and they knew what would happen. They
Yeah.
weren't dumb. He was like, nobody was dumb, you know. And actually, I'm gonna call out the name of the family that owns Purdue Pharma, if they still own it now, was the Sackler family, Sackler family. Y'all lift them up in prayer. The Sacklers, Lord, pray and keep the lights on. Oh my God.
We not laughing, but
Well, I
listen.
mean,
I
yeah.
mean,
No,
yeah,
no, no,
they
no.
might need
They
We
truly
laughing.
need Jesus. Come on, it's the truth.
They need that stronghold broken because they made a pact with somebody that won't God. But anyway, so Purdue Farmer, pretty much
Oh
they
Lord.
had a big old hearing even at in the United States. You know, where they're getting wind. Y'all know how it is when it goes up political chain, and then America decides to pay attention, and
Hmm.
and and and
the
they're up there,
shade,
and
the
they
shade.
literally ask all those pharmaceutical reps, do you feel like, I think the question was, do you feel like Oxycontin or your pharmaceutics are as addictive or less addictive or as addictive as tobacco? And they were like, no, I do not think it's addictive. Pass the mic. No, I do not think so. No, I do not think so. I mean, it was crazy.
Yeah.
So the sum up of it all, um, the it was some heroics because basically, like I said, Dr. Snyder's efforts was really the linchpin, because him and that blessed recorder, like I said, he's working at the pharmacy. He ends up getting a confession from Dr. Cleggett, that she was the one that was writing these prescriptions. You know, she was rude, nasty, whatever, but he kind of got it from her own mouth that she was doing these things, some of these things, um, and he assisted uh, in them going ahead and pushing forward. Matter of fact, I'm sorry, I'm about to leave out a very important part. How he helped was he actually got medical board,
Hmm.
the medical board
Yeah.
involved, because that's really what her demise was. The
Hmm.
medical board didn't have to go through all that bureaucracy stuff that the DEA and the FBI had to go through. They could go through and request all her records,
Hmm.
request everything, and they
Yeah.
could shut her and make her close her doors while they investigated. And that's what happened.
Hmm.
Mr. Snyder got in touch with them, and him doing his thing. So that put her on where she was cut off, and then God, it was very sad. This is a very sad, like, all ends. Like,
Hmm.
it had victories, and it's like real life. You have victories, and then you have your sadness, because Dr. Cleggett, her the enemy just used her and then tried to
Honey,
kill her
and threw
afterwards, after
away.
he was done.
Okay.
After he
Yeah.
was done, because you had this
Hmm.
obviously book intelligent, enough to become a doctor, beautiful black woman, attractive,
Yeah.
whatever she had going. She had children,
Hmm.
um, and all of these things. But man, she got closed down. Uh, they believe she was also using the opioids, and she ended up getting in a bad car accident when she was set to go for trial. And she's had all these counts that were going to come against her, but her accident was so bad that when you looked at her on the film, it looked like she had a stroke or something to that effect. And she has all these medical issues, and she was in such a bad. She was partially paralyzed at the time of her trial, so they just reduced the counts and all that stuff like that because of her medical condition. But she never practiced again. She never was able to practice medicine again.
Yeah.
So I think
That's how he do you.
yeah,
Honey.
he uses you and throw you away, honey.
Yeah.
But then, like I said, at the end, Mr. Snyder was able to get a lot of things implemented to where the pharmacies do what they do now because of Mr. Snyder. And I even wanted to mention too from earlier episodes, Mr. Snyder really took. Mr. Snyder was a good example of how you take a tragedy
Mm.
and flip that thing and make it a positive thing. Because at one point he did seem overly consumed with it. But this man started talking to high schools. This man actually had a student, a young man that he talked to, and that young man helped him help to get
Yeah.
Dr. Cleggett. He was really turning young people around. He became a mentor to the
Mm-hmm.
high school children. So he really, and he accounted it to God. He cried when he said, Lord, he said, I did it the right way. I didn't do nothing dirty.
Yeah.
I didn't have nobody hurt or killed, you know, because Mr. Snyder, Mr. Snyder was a G man. He even had
Yeah.
somebody in the neighborhood was like, "You want me to kill him?" When I find him, when they was talking about
Mm-hmm.
finding the young man who killed his son, he was like, and he said, "I thought about it," but he was like, "No,
Yeah.
I want to do this right." So that I think I summed it up. Y'all let me know if I left anything out. I think I summed up. That was pretty much it.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
One more thing. I want to say this again. Even though Purdue Pharma had to pay out a settlement, they were sued by some states, but it was a slap on the hand in comparison to what they actually made. I wrote down here since 1996, 35 billion with a B
Mm.
worth of sales in Oxycontin has been sold from Purdue Pharma alone.
Crazy.
Wow.
Man. Yeah, I mean, they have since filed for bankruptcy.
Okay.
And I just
Amen.
Good.
saw, yeah,
Good.
Amen.
and I just saw on TV last night a commercial about the whole Cotton and the opioid crisis, and people basically them telling you call this number. Whenever they reach a settlement, if you
Yeah.
had you or your loved one was affected by OxyContin, call to get your money. That's basically what it
Right.
was saying. I was like, wow. But they have since filed bankruptcy, but they can still, I guess, get the money from whatever they paid to that settlement. I'm assuming they have it in an
Hmm.
account somewhere, and they can submit a claim in order to get the money.
Yeah, I
If
just
only
want them
they
to
had
stop
something
selling
like
medicine.
that for crack.
Oh, wow. Well,
I
because
know,
it's
right?
illegal to eat well, but yeah.
Yeah. The only difference
Would
between
be
the crack
nice.
epidemic and this is one of the things I hope we get to when we're got in the discussion after this, but it's that when it was connected to something legal, they didn't have a script for this
They didn't.
because it was legal for a doctor to prescribe
To
you
price,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
oxycodone and all the things. So they
Mm-hmm.
didn't know how to deal with this because doctors were the trusted people.
They
It
were.
was
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
like cops and firemen, doctors, teachers. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? They're the good
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
You know, they just
Yeah.
trying to help us. They care about your health. But just because
Hmm.
you have a lab coat and a, and a,
Come
and,
Mm-hmm.
on.
a, and a degree, do
Come
not
on.
exempt you from being ratchet, wrong,
If,
evil, and all
basically.
the things. You can have the love of money, and
Mm-hmm.
that will cause you to
The
do all kinds
root
of
of
evil.
all evil. Yeah.
So lab coat does not equate automatic trust. And I mind you, I just want to be respectful. You doctors who are listening to us, I'm not trying to say for us to just not listen to doctors, advice, but go with
Yeah.
your gut. You know what I'm saying? There's certain things that if I was prescribed it, I'd be like, thanks, but no thank you, because
Mm-hmm.
I just, you know,
Yeah.
but yeah.
But yeah, going back to episode 3, what I thought was really, really interesting was how they tried to change the languaging, because they were talking about prior to 1980, they had stopped prescribing opioids because there have been previous opioid epidemics that happened, the soldiers coming back from the Vietnam War, and then there was another opioid, crisis. So they had stopped doing that. But then in 1990, the conversation shifted to, like you were saying, compassion, and you weren't considered a compassionate doctor if you didn't prescribe opioids, and it, got into this pain management. But what was even more interesting was how Purdue Pharma, their marketing technique, and when they were talking about the whole addiction piece, they would brought out a term called pseudo addiction, which was, and they totally flipped the script, because basically what they said is that these people are not addicted to the medication. They are addicted to getting their pain treated. And so it's not the medication itself that is causing the addiction, it's their pursuit for pain relief. This is the languaging that was changed in order to get people to more widely accept, prescribing opioids. So it
like
was,
in the Bible.
Yeah,
just like in the garden. You really can't. Huh?
I just said, did he not say?
Did he not say? Did he really say you couldn't eat from this tree? I mean, is that what he really said?
Yep. Yeah.
Speech, communication, like it's so how things can be so twisted.
I'm telling you.
To fit our own agendas.
Yeah. And how one word can just change
everything.
Conversation.
All I got to say,
pseudo.
Yeah.
Right. All I got to say is woe unto the FDA. Woe unto them.
Oh my God.
FDA, Jesus.
They trash, and they need to go do a
big trash
and just do something, because I already knew the FDA was crazy about what they consider a fruit, what they allow in our school lunches, and call a fruit or a vegetable. It's all about money. It's all about lobbying. It's all about
somebody's pockets will be lined. Okay.
Yes.
But you can't tell me with them billions that they were making that they were not funding people's campaigns. Come on. So
$36 billion.
Come on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Listen, the U.S. attorney at that time did not want to go through with the case that was going on against Dr. Cleggett. Did not want to bring the case and the hammer down. The U.S. attorney's office.
Yeah.
Because of kickback.
Yeah.
It was some kickback.
It was.
I mean, we can't prove that, but that's
actually, I had did some more research. Let me see. And it was talking about that whole compassionate piece. It was in the same article, the Mayo Clinic article that I was talking about earlier. And it was talking about how many good intentions led to the opioid crisis, that whole compassionate care and switching that conversation for doctors made them prescribe it more. And also they had patient satisfaction surveys.
Of course they did.
So basically these surveys, the doctors who were not prescribing the medications that the patients wanted, they got bad surveys.
Right.
And it affected their bonuses and them kickbacks. So naturally they were like, well, let me just go on and give it to them, because if I don't, then I'm not going to get, this financial incentive for a high patient satisfaction survey.
Right.
So I just wanted to bring that out, that was part of it. So
I forgot about that. This whole thing was so diabolical on every level. On every level.
A lot of different, it was almost like the perfect storm, that was created, that ended up creating the problem, from the pharmacies who didn't want to say anything because, hey, we're getting paid, why should we rock the boat? To the doctors who were being pressured by their clients to give them medications, to other people's pockets who were probably being lined in order to stay quiet. It was just a recipe for disaster, pretty much.
It was. And by the time people got bold enough, because I remember that pharmaceutical rep was on the third episode and fourth episode, he said when it got real bad, he said one time he went to go sell some oxy to somebody. He said the doctor looked at him, took his sample and his pamphlet, balled it up in front of his face and threw it in.
Now he was
because he knew what was going on.
He was like, I'm not having this. You go tell it to somebody else, know. Right. But yes, do we want to go into the underlining things we got from this yet, or?
I'm trying to see what if I wanted to pull out anything else from the whole
the episodes. Okay.
Yeah, let me see. Yeah, but yeah, he was definitely a G. That he tried to get on tax evasion, everything, and then finally it was like, well, let me, go this other route.
I'm telling you, he was a bold soldier. Bold soldier.
Definitely. But what I thought was interesting about Cleggett is she was saying how, they were told that whatever that a patient's pain is whatever they say it is. So it is kind of hard to measure whether or not the patient that's coming in is a drug addict but I mean, she knew, but I'm just saying, like, for those doctors who were unsuspecting, it's if somebody comes in and say, well, my pain is at a 10, then you just kind of got to take their word for it because you can't really measure.
But then I think something else that Mr. Snyder brought out, which was probably in episode maybe 2, leading up into 3, was when they showed footage of the prescriptions that were being written, she was starting them out heavy.
Yeah, like I said, she knew, but I was talking about like...
Yeah, she knew. So it was like, you're starting them out at 40 milligrams of Oxycontin?
Yeah.
We don't want to start at 5? I mean, I don't know how it measures. Can we work up to? So
and go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm talking.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think, I mean, obviously we know Dr. Cleggett had a lot going on with her, and her motives were clearly not pure. But to that point, as far as like a patient saying their pain level is this, I think that's, we've all been to the doctor and had to be prescribed different things. I've had wisdom teeth pulled and, just various things, and they prescribe you pain medication. Yeah. And I've had Vicodin before, and I've had hydrocodone, and it was always 0.5 or 5, because this is not something that I normally take.
Yeah.
This is pain, but it's not going to be forever. Let's just start you off something low and then build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is my thing. I know I can't speak for the medical community, but yes, you got the little smiley faces like, how do you feel? 1, 2, 3, 4. but if I tell you that my act, what happened was I fell, I don't know, down my stairs or something, and you touch me, you're looking at and there is no bone, no fracture, no broken bones, no this, no that, no bruises, no, you know what I'm saying? It was kind of like, you have to go with your medical expertise, and then yes, you trust what the patient says, but kind of balance that. I think it's a whole thing where everything is so rushed in our jobs, and doctors at one point was just trying to hurry up and get to the next patient, the next patient, and the next patient, because they had to see all these patients instead of being able to do the legwork and having somebody say, look at this patient and see, who did they see before me? What did they get? You know what I'm saying? To kind of go down
due diligence
and do their due diligence, because they already knew that these addictions and overdoses was a real thing, and they were happening, and that you had the dope dealer drug company, coming peddling all the medicine. So, that's just what I'd say about that. There's got to be.
Like to that, I'm just saying to that point, how I remember in episode 2, Mr. Snyder was videotaping people walking in with crutches and getting healed and delivered. And coming out with crutches.
Oh, Lord. You remember that commercial, right. Heal, the power to heal.
I'm not with you.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Seriously, they were going in with crutches and coming out with crutches in hand, and it goes back to that. I mean, first of all, we really can't use Dr. Claggett as a motive example because she was so shady. Yeah. But, you know, is what you're saying, that due diligence. Do you go, do you seek out records? Do you say, who did you see? You know, a lot of the healthcare system is a system. So, you know, Atrium Healthcare is a system. So if you went to one Atrium, everything is in the system. Yeah. You know, that type of thing. And it's what you're saying is so true. We're in such a microwave generation, and we're so, you know, even doctors, because I used to work in the doctor's office, is customer service driven. Mm-hmm. So there is an expectation for you to see a certain amount of clients in a certain amount of time, you know, and you may not be as thorough because you have these time constraints.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna definitely keep this conversation rolling.
All right.
Thank you for listening today. Tune in next week for part 2 of our discussion. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Lastly, if you or someone you know needs help with substance abuse, contact the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services National Hotline at 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357. God bless.